We're going to begin right now. Mama Nokichi is coming with the historical tribute, and she is about Black power. She is a Black lawyer. As a matter of fact, she wrote a book called Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice. She's coming with a piece on justice and giving us putting things in historical perspective for us today. Mama Nokichi, will you come and bring us the historical tribute now?
We are men. We are not beasts, and we do not intend to be beaten or driven as such. The entire prison populace, that means each and every one of us here, have set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disregard for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States. What has happened here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed. Those were the words read by Elliot L.D. Barkley on September 9, 1971, to seek to bring light to their treacherous experiences at New York State's Attica State Prison. Elliot L.D. Barkley, his name is one that should be shouted out, honored and revered, like that of George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson, Fred Hampton. We are talking about a brave 21-year-old brother who was days away from his scheduled release date and who was the epitome of the statement, one is not free until all of us are free. A man who spoke truth to power. We need to remember his name, Elliot L.D. Barkley. My historical tribute this morning is dedicated to the memory of those who valiantly seized the moment and fought for their human rights against horrific odds, yet needlessly perished due to state retaliation on the day of September 13th, 1971. Yes, exactly on this very day, 49 years ago. Do you know where you were on that day? I do. I was 16 years old, glued to the 6 o'clock news on the black and white television screen in my family's living room, watching in horror the images of powerless Black men paraded naked through a prison yard after Attica, a prison in upstate New York, is needlessly stormed. I remember vividly how hard it was to hear the TV as torrential rains were beating against the front windows of my family's home, rains that had pummeled the East Coast that week of September 9th through 13th, 1971. That is my memory. Think back to your own. If you were born and of the age and consciousness, where were you and what were you doing when Attica exploded? Many of us know what happened at Attica. Many of us don't. But what is not common knowledge are the events leading up to what the New York State Special Commission on Attica characterized as, quote, the bloodiest one-day encounter between Americans since the Civil War. What really happened at Attica? What did the prisoners want? How did the officials react? Who killed whom? Has anything changed since the uprising? 43 prisoners and hostages lay dead after the 4-day rebellion. Many more were wounded. Why? The uprising did not come out of nowhere. In September of 1971, Attica prison, there were over 2,200 people locked up in a facility built to house 1,600. All the guards but one. All the prison administrators were white. Prisoners at Attica spent 14 to 16 hours a day in their 6x9 cells. They got one shower a week, essentially consisting of a bucket of water. In June 1971, 5 Attica prisoners established the Attica Liberation Faction to try to bring about some change in the conditions. They started reading and teaching political ideology, Lenin, Marx, Malcolm, Du Bois, others. They study groups led by prisoners affiliated with the Nation of Islam, the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords, the Five Percenters. They had to get along with all the different factions to become one solid movement. In July, they presented a manifesto of 27 demands to Commissioner of Corrections Russell Oswald and Governor Nelson Mandela, summarized as follows: we demand the constitutional rights of legal representation and parole board hearings. We demand a change in medical staff. There are numerous mistakes made, improper and erroneous medication given by untrained personnel. We demand adequate visiting conditions. We demand an end to the segregation of prisoners due to their political beliefs. We demand an end to the punishment of prisoners who practice a constitutional right to peaceful dissent. We demand the right to subscribe to political papers and books. We demand that better food be served, that inmates wishing a pork-free diet should have one. And it went on, 27 detailed demands, nothing radical, but just basic human rights. Commissioner Oswald did not act on those demands. Instead, the warden responded by increasing the frequency of cell searches and censoring all references to prison conditions from news sources. And then George Jackson was killed by correctional officers in San Quentin on August 21st, 1971. His killing sparked protests, including work stoppages at prisons across the country. One of the founders of the Attica faction explained it this way. He said, what really solidified things was George Jackson's death. We thought, how can we pay tribute to George Jackson? Because a lot of us idolize him and the things he was doing and the things he was exposing about the system. So we decided that we would have a silent fast that whole day in honor of him. We would wear black armbands. No one was to eat anything that whole day. So on August 22nd, 1971, a hunger strike ensued at Attica in honor of George Jackson. Prisoners marched to the mess hall for breakfast in single file. They sat silently. They refused to eat. Frank Big Black Smith, who later on served on the negotiating committee during the September Rebellion and protected hostages and observers, yet was later viciously tortured and brutalized by guards. He described the scene on the morning after Jackson's death. He said, I didn't know anything about George Jackson. So when we got to the mess hall that morning, everything was quiet. No one was saying nothing. And you're talking about 500, 600, 700 people. The unity and the solidarity of the brothers was the epitome of the 7 principles: Umoja, Kujichagulia, Ujima, Ujamaa, Nia, Kuumba, and yes, Imani. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun or fester like a sore and then run? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Bill, if you could put on the first slide, I would appreciate it. September the 9th, some prisoners subdued a lieutenant and overpowered 4 guards and locked them in cells. Uprising quickly spread to the other cell blocks with more than 1,200 prisoners congregating in cell block D. Ultimately, 42 correctional officers were taken hostage. Although members of the Attica Liberation faction did not participate in the initial takeover, as a result of their organized front, they quickly joined in to move the prisoners toward explicit demands for reform. The prisoners formed a committee to negotiate with the commissioner for the release of the hostages, demanded that outside observers be present. It's important to note that the members of the Attica Liberation Front, and specifically the Black Muslims, protected the hostages and were credited with keeping order and the peace during the long, stressful days of the takeover. Let me tell you this. The prisoners were brilliant. They had a collective leadership. They were cohesive. They exercised solidarities. These were their initial demands. We want complete amnesty, meaning freedom from any and all physical, mental, and legal reprisals. We want speedy and safe transportation out of confinement to a non-imperialistic country. And we urgently demand immediate negotiations with listed observers, including Attorney William Kunstler, Huey P. Newton, Tom Wicker, the New York Times, and more, that they would guarantee the safe passage of all people to and from the institution. They said, we want them here to witness this degradation so that they can better know how to bring this degradation to an end. Listen up, my sisters and brothers. These were not mad, crazed prisoners, though they had every right to be. The prisoners were spot-on organized. They methodically constructed what I would call departments with essential services such as medical, food preparation and service, communication, security. We're talking about the necessity to feed and shelter and ensure the basic necessities of over 1,000 people. The guards that had been taken hostage were given food first, and there were prisoners assigned to watch over the guards and make sure those prisoners seeking revenge and retaliation for years of abuse against them did not cause them harm. Bill, can you have slide 2, please? Rockefeller, however, refused to come to Attica to aid in the negotiations and also refused the prisoners' demand for amnesty. Attorney Bill Kunstler later testified that they had worked out with the prisoners and the commissioner several formulas, y'all, for amnesty just hours before the attack. And he said, quote, if we had been allowed to continue, everyone would be alive and the matter would be settled today. But the process was not allowed to continue. Despite the fact that it had been raining steadily for 4 days, that the prisoners' morale was being worn down, despite the fact the food was running out, and they just might have given in, despite all of those facts, on September 13, 1971, Rockefeller ordered thousands of National Guardsmen, state troopers, and corrections officials to attack the prisoners. Bill, slide 3, please. Hundreds of prisoners are shot along with 9 of the hostages. They were shot by the stormtroopers. The prisoners had no guns, and many of the alleged leaders were selectively marked for assassination. One prisoner said later, quote, it was like a slaughter, man. The people were defenseless. They had sticks and homemade weapons to defend themselves, but this doesn't compare, man, with magnums and carbines. Egregiously, the corrections department said that the hostages' throats were slashed by the prisoners, a blatant lie. The coroner's report later showed that no hostages died of slashed throats. All died of police gunshot wounds. Despite the humaneness and the restraint shown by the Attica brothers, after the prison was retaken, the men were subjected to extreme cases of brutality and torture, made to strip and crawl on the ground through the muddy yard and forced to run naked between a gauntlet of enraged white officers who tortured and beat them mercilessly with sticks and clubs. Elliot L.D. Barkley was among those murdered, marked for assassination, shot in the back after the surrender. Slide 4, please. Naked with hands over their head, the prisoners were forced to walk barefoot on glass, bleeding feet and all. Everyone was abused and beat by gauntlet guards and troopers yelling, run nigger, run white nigger, run Spanish nigger. Some were sexually tortured by guards. They were dumped in cold cells naked. Many had fractures with no medical attention. Last slide, please, Bill. But despite it all, as a result of the heroic stance and sacrifice of the Attica brothers during the uprising for human rights, changes were made throughout the New York State prison system, as well as in prisons across the country. Grievance procedures were instituted. It was the dawning of a new day and mass attention to prison issues. After decades in the courts, the state of New York finally agreed to pay $12 million to the Attica brothers to settle the case. And finally today, as we are in the streets shouting Black Lives Matter, get your knee off our necks, what do we want? Freedom, when do we want it now? We must never forget the heroic heroism and sacrifice of those from George Jackson to Elliot L.D. Barkley and the roll call of names of human beings that you see on the screen who lost their lives this day, September 13th, nearly 50 years ago. Asante Sana.
I say. Wow, Aseo.
Karibu. Oh, what a beautiful recollection of those events at Attica. Thank you, Mama Nokichi, for doing that. A beautiful presentation, beautiful coordination with Brother Bill and the slides. Oh, we need to research that. We need to look at that independently for ourselves and never forget. Thank you. Thank you. Asante Sana, Madasi, Mama Nokichi.